Baldwin, and welcome to a very special private screenings. Turner Classic Movies was launched on April 14, 1994, and from the beginning, Robert Osborne has been the channel's host and driving force. Osborne is a man whose fascinating stories, historical knowledge, and sheer love of the subject have made his name synonymous with classic film. But the story of Robert Osborne's own life is one that could be a movie itself. A small-town boy who at a young age falls in love with film, moves to Hollywood, and gives acting a try. He then becomes a writer, an Oscar historian, and creates an industry for himself as the keeper of the flame of classic film. All this at a time when nostalgia for Hollywood didn't even exist. Then along came Turner Classic Movies, with a job custom-made for his passion. Today, TCM is more popular than ever, a channel marking its 20th year and showing, on average, nearly 400 movies a month. TCM has also expanded its reach with an annual film festival in Hollywood, as well as cross-country screenings and glamorous ocean sailing cruises catering to thousands of classic movie fans.
Thank you.
And no one would argue that Robert Osborne is one of the primary reasons for TCM's ongoing success. So here's a look at the life, the career, and the story of my friend, Robert Osborne, next on Private Screenings.
One single word that would describe Robert Osborne? Oh, I would say kindness.
Gracious, smart.
A gentleman.
Kenny Bear.
Sincere, honest, makes a wonderful friend.
He's loyal, and he's been loyal, I think, to all of us who have known him for such a long, long time.
Truthfulness, non-judgmental, very attractive,
handsome, interesting, curious, splendid storyteller.
Generosity.
I was going to say generous.
In every facet. And I know these are words that are thrown around a lot. But I swear to you, they apply to Bob.
He's still as excited and as energetic and as full of wit and humor as he's always been. He gets better. It's like a good wine. He gets better with every year.
What would you say is the one thing more than any other that accounts for your success? Talent, charm, or luck?
Probably talent. Only kidding. Only kidding. No, luck. Has to be luck.
Why?
Well, I got really lucky. I mean, I was like always into old films. Passionate about it, always at a time when nobody was interested in that sort of stuff. And I should have been like trying to plan something that I was going to do for my career. I went to college, got a college education in journalism and all of that. But I was always about old movies and stuff when there was no place you could ever use something like that. And I have a friend, Carol Cook, who always said, she said, you know, you're so lucky. She said, you're always gathering all that useless information all your life, and finally God or Ted Turner, maybe the same person, you know, came along and invented something for you to use it in.
Now,
I feel that was very lucky.
But do you think, though, that you were never angling for the kind of job you have? It was a passion.
I was never angling because this job didn't exist.
Right. In other words, you never foresaw that TCM would evolve.
No, not at all. But I went, you know, it's like crazy, and I brought you a sample of that. When I was in college, every Saturday, going through college, on Saturdays, I was not drinking or partying or having a good time. I was having what was a good time for me. I went to the library. I went through every issue of the New York Times from 1935 for 20 years and made notes of all the first-run theaters in New York, what was playing, when they changed the bill, you know, how long this movie ran at the Radio City Music Hall or at the Capitol or the Astor or the Rivoli, whatever, who was in it, you know. And I was getting this education about what was popular, and I kept this all, and I put it into a book that I had that goes through every, you know, movie theater, typed it all out, so that I was getting this education about film, and again, there was no place to use it. So that's Blackie. When I was in a fraternity, they used to hide it every once in a while, and it would drive me crazy. I couldn't find Blackie.
Bob, this says recipe for Boston cream pie. What are you talking about?
That's another part of my life, yes.
No. Well, it's interesting how your passion, to reuse that word, is contained in this book. And this book is, in a sense, the kind of, just as films and television shows are based on books, how they take a book and they make a movie out of it. Turner took this book and made a television series out of it. He made this book was the book that was the Bible in a way, to some degree, of TCM.
I certainly would have aimed for a job like this if it existed, but it didn't exist.
Well, when you started, which is 20 years ago, 1994.
Right.
And now we're going to start the Turner classic movies.
When you started, did you have a sense that it would become what it's become?
No, I had no idea.
Because there were other competitors
Well, I
as
knew
well.
that there were other people that love movies like I do. There are many people. I felt lucky I was the one that got the job. I had no idea so many people would respond to it in the way they have, particularly younger people. And we have so many younger people that write to us, that come to our film festival and come to the cruise and stuff, that are as crazy about movies as I was when I was that age. So I knew there was an audience, but I had no idea it would be as big an audience or as passionate an audience. But I also think that has to do a lot with the fact that today, so many movies are not movies a lot of people want to go see in theaters.
Very niche
And
market.
there's a violent, and they're too adult for people to just go be entertained by them and stuff. And we do have that, on the channel. They can be entertained. They can be, see a movie like Grapes of Wrath, which inspire them, but leave them with kind of a positive feel at the end of it and everything. And so people do respond to that. And I wasn't sure that many people would respond to it in the way they have.
So for those people who don't know this about you, I mean, they could always look this up in the modern world on the internet, but for those people who don't know what your writing career was before you did TCM, you were writing for
Hollywood Reporter,
Hollywood Reporter
for many years.
Many years.
I was a journalism major.
Right.
The thing that helped me with this was the fact that I did start out being an actor, and I spent many years doing a lot of commercials.
Yes, there's lighthearted living in lighthearted Falstaff.
They go together, the deep wheat filter and the Viceroy blend.
Now that's what I call coffee.
It is good, isn't it?
A toast to the new kitchen, the new coffee, and you.
Carling Black Label is the premium beer sold coast to coast at the popular local price.
Yes, the beer around here is Pearl beer.
Someday I'll do it. Build a cabin when I get the kids through school and pay off the mortgage. Responsibilities. And what if something happens to me?
And I did soap opera and...
You were on a soap opera?
I was.
So was I.
The Young Marrieds, yes.
Yeah.
But I really didn't like it because I wanted to really do interesting work. And I was, I was always in a suit, carrying a briefcase, and I would come into a room and I would help them move the plot along for those people who hadn't watched for like a week, to catch them up on what had happened.
Well,
Everything comes out in adoption proceedings, Susan. The things that help and the things that hurt.
if I lost Jerry again...
So I felt they were rather colorless and not that interesting, but I was happy to have a job. But the thing is that, and I was very lucky early on, this is a whole story unto itself, was put under contract to Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz at the Desi Studios. I wanted to be an actor, I thought, and the training I got, though in what little I did do on camera as an actor, I was in the pilot for the Beverly Hillbillies, which I thought nobody would ever see again, and which still, shows up on YouTube and haunts you.
Who did you play? Were you their banker? Were you the Clampetts banker?
I was the right-hand man of the banker.
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Drysdale.
All right, Taylor. Well, are we all set to give the Clampetts a red carpet reception?
Well, I'm afraid Mrs. Drysdale still isn't too happy, sir.
Yes, I know. Oh, my wife is very upset that I got the estate next to ours for the Clampetts. Says I don't even know what kind of people they are.
Do you?
I know to the dollar what kind of people they are. They're my kind of people. Loaded.
But I had no idea.
It's classic television.
Yes, that it would be classic television. But
you and
anyway,
I would kill to be on Beverly Hillbillies now.
The experience of being in it got me comfortable on camera. So when I became a journalist, and it was Lucille Ball who actually said, you know, you could do this, you know, you could do this, but it's not going to make you happy. She got to know me, and she got to know my folks, and she said, you know, you come from a nice, normal family. You're not street smart. You're not from New York. And she said, you know, I think you could learn to do all that, but it's not part of your nature. Right. You love films, you love research.
And appreciation.
Yeah, be a journalist. You were a journalist at major college. That's what you should do. And she said, we have enough actors. We don't have enough people, you know, that are writing about the industry and stuff. And she said, and the first thing you should do is write a book if you're a journalist. And I said, why that? And she said, because if you're a journalist and you write a book, people will look at you differently. They know you have the discipline to sit down and do it.
Right.
And in those days, you had to put paper in a typewriter and type it out. And if it didn't work, you took that out and you had to retype it and everything. So it wasn't that easy to be writing.
It was a lot of manual labor compared to now.
Yeah, a little easier today with computers. And she's the one that really guided me away from acting. So I became a journalist. I finally got on with the Hollywood Reporter, and they would come to the Hollywood Reporter and they'd say, a TV station, they'd say, hey, Henry Fonda's in the hospital. We need somebody to come on the news and talk about Henry Fonda. And they always say, well, you know, Osborne knows all those old movie stars, you know, and they would send me. So I got experience doing television. The first thing I ever did on television actually was standing out in front of Cedars-Sinai Hospital doing a live telecast about Henry Fonda being in the hospital. And I think now how stupid that was, because if I hadn't done it well, you know, you're doing that in Los Angeles. Nobody's ever going to ask you to do television again if you muck it up. But I got through it okay. And eventually the TV station, Channel 11, asked me to come as a regular entertainment reporter. But the great thing was, the lucky thing for me, and this is where luck really comes into it, is through Lucy and then through the Hollywood Reporter, I was able to meet people, and those people that were around then were those people I admired so much. So I could meet in those days, and it was different than today when the press and actors are you know, kind of at loggerheads. Yes. At that time, they got along together.
Right.
And
they were in the same business.
Yeah, you were invited, like every year, Jimmy Stewart would invite every columnist individually to a lunch with him. So you would have a lunch with Jimmy Stewart, and he'd talk about his career and his life, and he opened a door so that anytime you were writing about Jimmy Stewart, you could call him up on the phone and say, I just want to clarify, is this accurate and stuff?
There was cooperation.
And he knew you. So that was my entry to Hollywood. You could meet Cary Grant and you could meet Judy Garland, and I became a great friend of Garland's and of Lana Turner's and of Hedy Lamar's and of Betty Davis and people. And it seems bizarre now that you think, well, how can somebody just walk into the lives of these people? The fact is, they weren't working that much at that point. They were kind of a little beyond their peak years.
They were more
so
available.
They had time to talk to you. They loved somebody like me that knew their background because they didn't have to explain who they were, which sounds strange today, but it was part of the research I'd done and everything.
For people.
Yeah, so I had people, they were welcoming to me because I could sit with Barbara Stanwyck, and she knew I knew her background, so she didn't have to say,
you
hey.
You could talk about Edward Dmytryk. And,
yes, exactly. So she wouldn't have to say, hey, I was kind of a big deal at one time or something. I knew that.
Right.
You know, but no, people didn't really care about Barbara Stanwyck then. People didn't care about Betty Davis. People didn't care about Judy Garland.
Sure.
And it's difficult today. And I remember going one time to a party, and I can't think how stupid I was. It was a party at Peter Lawford's house, and he lived in the old Louis B. Mayer mansion down in Malibu. And I loved being in the house because I thought, my God, this is where Louis B. Mayer lived when he was running MGM. And so I'm sure the people that were here with conferences and business meetings and stuff must have just boggled my mind. So I was anxious to be in that home, but I remember trying to talk to somebody at a buffet table, and in the other room, Judy Garland was singing at the piano, and I was thinking, I've just been to a couple of other parties this week. She was always at the piano singing, and I can't talk to this person. There's so much noise coming from the other room, and I'm thinking now, that was Judy Garland. I should have been sitting there at her feet, you know, thinking this is a magic moment, because it was. But that was like a common thing that went on in those days, and I was lucky enough to be there during that period. If I'd gone there 15 years earlier, they would have been too busy. They wouldn't have had any time for me at all. So, if I'd gone 10 years later, they would have been gone or moved or whatever.
So in a way, TCM, as well as other venues that have contributed toward classic film appreciation, if you will. But TCM being a principal among those, you kind of have come full circle to now to where Judy Garland walked into a room and started playing the piano, everybody would shut up and gather around the piano. Because we put her in her proper place in movie history.
Exactly.
I mean, you have in this program.
Hi, I'm Robert Osborne, and welcome to Turner Classic Movies. Today is a very special day.
We're going to spend some time with one of the all-time movie greats, a movie that constituted a comeback of major proportions for Judy Garland, Bette Davis, James Dean, Barbara Stanwyck, Joan Crawford, Henry Fonda, Audrey Hepburn, Elizabeth Taylor, John Wayne, Greta Garbo, Humphrey Bogart. Has there ever been a movie star like Cary Grant? The direction is by the great William Wyler, John Ford, Howard Hawks, Frank Capra, Alfred Hitchcock. The film that won more Oscars than any other at the time it was honored. Best Actress, Best Actor, Best Director, Best Picture of the Year. The one, the only, Gone with the Wind. The Maltese Falcon, West Side Story, The Wizard of Oz, Singin' in the Rain, Some Like It Hot, Lawrence of Arabia, Casablanca, North by Northwest. One of the other lucky things for me was the fact of meeting Lucille Ball, because being around Lucille Ball when I was and being invited to her house, I realized, because at this point, Lucille Ball was maybe the most famous woman in the world. I mean, this was at the peak of her success. And she was having trouble with her husband, and he wasn't around so much, so she was always gathering a couple of us from the Desi group to come and play cards and be at her house. And so in the course of that, I saw that this famous woman had headaches like everybody else. She was having kids that she was raising.
She was real.
She was real, but she was a human being. By that same token, I could later in the week see that Lucille Ball enter an event and think, oh my God, Lucille Ball, it's so exciting. You know, I could see her as the movie star, but I also knew she was a human being. So I was always comfortable meeting those people. So as big a fan as I was of Bette Davis to me was somebody who was very kind, very interesting. Complicated woman, but a terrific woman. Only really complicated when she got ill and could never say, I don't feel well. She would just take it out on you, with anger or something like that. But she was a terrific person. Mm-hmm. And so I was comfortable around these people. So that helped too. Because if, say, the first person I'd met was not Lucille Ball, but say Lana Turner, that I was kind of batty about, I probably would have been very tongue-tied. And so when I eventually did meet Lana Turner, I realized that this was a human being like everybody else, with same problems, not up on a pedestal.
Will you accept something from me, which is from my heart? The most grateful thank you for what I feel was truly a love letter, unsolicited, when you reviewed my book. And I tell you, when I saw it, and I didn't see it live because I was on the road, I saw the cassette, and I cried. I was so grateful.
Thank you. That means a lot.
And
thanks.
I didn't want to tell you before. I wanted to tell you right out in public.
Thank you.
You have given me such enjoyment. And I have the cassette, so if I feel a little down, I can always plug in the
Or
stars
just call
for
me
it.
up. I'll come over and say it.
Yeah.
Amazing. So do me a favor, before we have this precious...
you want to throw this away?
The Magna Carta here, I'd like you to put that over there somewhere safe so we don't have that damaged in case the ceiling falls in on us here on 23rd Street. I understand you have a special connection to Natalie Wood.
Well, I do, from a standpoint that she was the first person I ever interviewed for anything. It was for a magazine. She had just done a movie called Inside Daisy Clover, and she had a big movie out at that point called The Great Race. They were high-profile movies, and she invited me to her house. Now, I was writing for a very inconsequential magazine, so I was very flattered that I could go to her house, and it was just Natalie and I, and she was a big, big star. And I sat down, and I didn't know where to start. I had questions, but they jumped all over the place. They had no... And she said, look, and I had my notes, and I couldn't find my notes and didn't know what I was doing. And she said, let me help you. Let's just... And we sat down on the floor, and she took my notes, and she said, okay, you should really start with this one, and then go to this, and then maybe do this, and it'll lead to this and stuff. And she was so kind and courteous and everything like that. And I thought, later she should have thrown me out of the house saying, you're not competent to do this. I'm a busy person. You're wasting my time. Right. And she should have. But she was so kind and so encouraging and was so sweet to me. And then because Bob Wagner had been a friend of mine for a long time, so I kind of saw her several times after that, and she was always so sweet to me, and I thought she did me such a great favor by teaching me something and being kind to me.
Robert is one of the best interviewers I know, certainly.
He takes it very seriously, and he listens. An interviewer has to listen.
It's wonderful to be sitting in that chair across from him, and anything can happen, and I love that.
He takes it all in, and he can guide you in a certain way, but basically, he just lets you talk.
He gets you to answer and tell things about yourself that you don't even realize yourself.
He has an understanding of the craft and of performing and of taste.
His curiosity is combined with knowledge, admiration, and kindness.
Take a few minutes, if you would, to talk about your childhood. Where did you grow up? And
I grew up in a very small town in the state of Washington, Colfax, Washington, farm community. I'm very glad I grew up there. It was a wonderful way to grow up. My dad was a school teacher, and then became a principal. We moved a couple of times to bigger school districts, all in the state of Washington.
What did he teach?
Geography and history. He was a great guy. Never got to know him terribly well. We got along great. My folks got along great. Had a sister. But my mother said it was always kind of like the shoemaker with the kids that are barefoot. Because being a teacher, my mother always felt that he spent so much time with other people's kids. He didn't spend much time with me. So it was my mother that really encouraged me to, do more of what I wanted to do. My dad was more, not quite understanding why I wanted to get into show business or something like that. But they both agreed that as long as I got an education and had something to fall back on, if I went to college, then I could do anything I wanted to do. As long as I had something I could make a living at.
What were movies like in your life as a child? Was there a cinema in Colfax, Washington?
Oh yeah, two. The Rose and the Roxy. I was, I eventually worked there, changed the marquee, fell off the marquee, broke both my arms. I mean, my life was all about the movies. I was never trouble as a kid. My sister was. She was 4 years older. She kind of tested the boundaries. All I cared about was having the freedom to go to the movies. And I remember being like 8 years old. We went back to Chicago as a family to pick up a school bus for the school district, and took the train back to Chicago from Spokane, Washington. Got back to Chicago. I used to get up in the morning, like at 8 years old, and in those days, there was no great danger about being a kid in a city in those days. And I used to get up while the folks were getting dressed, and I'd go out and I'd hit all the theaters, movie theaters in the Loop, and see the posters out in front and what was going on, and what was, here's an Alan Ladd movie, and then down a couple of blocks is a Greer Garson movie, and there's a Katharine Hepburn movie and stuff. So when my folks would get up and we'd go look for a place for breakfast, and they would want to go to a particular place, I'd say, I know where that is, and I could take them, because I knew it was you went down by the Alan Ladd movie, and then you turned right at the Greer Garson movie, and I showed them all over town. And so I was doing that at like 8 years old.
Amazing.
Movie passion at that time.
But I wanted to ask you a question, which was, in your early life, you were in the Air Force, correct? I want you to tell us a little bit about that. Where were you?
Well, actually, it's interesting because I had to be in the Air Force because there was a draft on at that time, and the only way I could complete college was to join the ROTC, which deferred you from the military till you graduated from college, but then you had to serve 2 years in the Air Force. And so I was the one that wanted to go overseas. Now, to go overseas was a great treat, I thought, because I'd never been to Europe, and the government would be paying for it. You'd be stationed somewhere overseas. I didn't want to be a pilot because then you had to sign up for 3 years, and I didn't want that extra year. I wanted to get going. And so, of all the people, I got stationed in Seattle. I wasn't sent overseas, and all my friends got sent overseas. And the reason I was that in my senior year of college, I'd already completed all the credits I needed to graduate, but I had to go a fourth year before I could graduate from college. I worked at a local television station and in the merchandising department. And so because I had connections to the television studio in Seattle, they put me in the recruiting office in Seattle so I could have connections to the television station to get free recruiting plugs and things like that. So I was stuck in Seattle. So that's actually when I became an actor, because in the evenings with nothing to do and very little to do in the daytimes, I started doing plays in Seattle. And I did a play. I kind of worked my way up from little teeny theaters to bigger theaters until Jane Darwell, remember Jane Darwell, Oscar winner for Grapes of Wrath, came to do Night Must Fall, and I got the part of Danny in Night Must Fall, which was a wonderful part. And she's the one that said, you know, when you finish here in the Air Force, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I think I'm going to go to New York and try to be an actor. She said, no. She said, you should come to California. I think you do well in pictures. And she said, I'll introduce you to an agent. You can live with my family and me out in the valley. We've got a little cottage you could stay in and everything. So I went to California instead of there. And then right away, in those days, kind of if you could walk and, talk at the same time, you could get a contract for a few months at a studio. And I got a 6-month contract at 20th Century Fox right away. And then during that course of that time, I did a Western that Paul Henreid directed, with the 2 cigarettes with Betty Davis for a TV series.
I'm afraid my business is to arrest your son.
Arrest? What for?
Suspicion of bank robbery and murder.
There'll be no shooting, Corey. You weren't raised that way. Let the marshal have his say.
I'm sorry, Mother. I lost my head.
And so I went back to the studio to Desi to thank the people for casting me, and to Paul Henreid had an office there to thank him. And I went to the casting place, and the guy said, well, no, it was a pleasure, and Paul liked working with you. And are you going to be auditioning for the Lucille Ball contract list she's putting together? I said, no, I don't know anything about that. He said, well, I think it's this coming week. Well, let me call her office and find out when the auditions are. So he called the office, and Lucille Ball answered the phone. And so he was saying, I got this guy here that might be right for your group, and I just need to know what day the auditions are and how does he sign up for that. So, and she obviously said, well, I'm not doing anything right now. Send him up. So I went up to this office, and there was Lucille Ball. And now this sounds strange, but I was such a movie guy, and I know she'd made movies, and I certainly, God knows, knew who she was. But she was a great television star, and I never watched television, so I didn't really have the knowledge of her as a television star that we all found out later.
That's tough when you meet television stars and they say, "Do you remember that episode where my character bought the bagel and it fell in the grate on the street?" And you're like, "Oh yes, of course. Yeah, I remember that."
Yeah,
and you've never seen the show in your whole life. It's weird. Yeah.
So we sat and talked, and she was fascinated by the fact that I was staying at Jane Darwell's house, because to her, the people she'd loved working with were the character actors, Harpo Marx and Charles Coburn and Donald Meek and Edward Everett Horton and people like that. Because I was trying to ask her about actors that she'd worked with, and she said, well, the actors didn't mean that much to me, the leading men. She said, I love the character people. I learned so much from them. And I knew who they were, and that fascinated her, because she thought, this kid, how does he know who Charles Coburn is, because he was long since gone at that point. And so she seemed kind of interested, and she said, do you have any film on yourself? And I said, well, I have a film that I just did with Paul Henreid here, but I don't think that'd be ready, because we just stopped filming yesterday. And I said, I did a test with Diane Baker at 20th Century Fox for a role in Diary of Anne Frank. And I said, but test was for her, so I don't know, how I came off on that. And so she got right on the phone. She called Fox, and she said, look, I want to look at the Diane Baker test for Diary of Anne Frank. Can you send it? It's Lucille Ball. Send it over. And we watched the test, and it wasn't particularly good. For me, it barely saw me, and Diane was wonderful in it and got the part. And so when it was over, Lucy was kind of cool. And I thought, well, she didn't like the test, but at least I had a chance to spend like an hour talking to Lucille Ball. So I left, thought no more about it, and about a week later, I got a telephone call from her office. It said, to my answering service, said, Lucille Ball wants you to call. Can you come to dinner on Friday night? She wants you to meet Desi. So I thought, well, maybe something's going on again. So I got all dressed up. I went to her house on Friday night, went in the door, and there was like Kay Thompson, Joseph Cotton, Janet Gaynor, Roger Edens, Chuck Walters, and a couple of other people, and Lucille Ball, no Desi. So we sat, I thought, this is really, this is exciting, but it's really strange company.